the Element Wealth studio set up at Danny Griffith Law Firm, the balcony overlooking the fabulous downtown Cleveland, Mississippi. And we are pleased to welcome now Dr. Dan Ennis. He is the president of Delta State University. Dr. Ennis, good to see you, sir.
I'm glad to be back. Thank you for having me. Welcome to the beautiful Delta.
Well, I'm pleased to finally get to visit with you in person. I know we've spoken remotely many times, and you've got, of course, the obligatory mascot. We got the Fighting Okra here.
I bought a little Fighting Okra with me for good luck and, to bring some good feelings to the event.
Absolutely. On the set, folks, if you're tuned into us on video, you can see it. Next year, we're going to get the full-size Fighting Okra.
Let's get the full mascot out here. But,
it's
a Fighting Okra, so we have to be very careful when we ask it to do things.
We don't want any hostile okra coming on.
It's always an angry vegetable. You just got to direct that anger toward our opponents.
That is so awesome. Well, so you guys were talking with our content director, Alex Payton, offline, discussing your tenure here at the university. It's hard to believe. 18 months?
Yeah, coming up on 18 months. I still count it in months, but pretty soon I'll be able to say almost 2 years, and that'll be nice. Yeah.
Well, gosh, it just seems like yesterday, of course, you and I were visiting, talking about the financial challenges experienced by the university, and you were discussing with me on the show your plans and your strategy to address that. Give us a status report. How are we doing?
Well, things are going well. We went through a pretty intense budget restructure in the spring, and we did make some cuts in personnel and some programming. But I was so delighted because, when I made the academic cuts in particular, I emphasized that we were going to take a large number, 21 programs, and collapse them down to fewer programs so there'd be enough students to support them. And we just had 2 new degree programs approved by the IHL. We had one earlier this fall. So by the time we get these new programs in place, we'll have a landing spot for everybody who has a variety of interests, but in programs that have a better student-faculty ratio, a more efficient way to deliver it, and a more affordable way for a school like Delta State. So we're very excited.
Dr. Ennis, explain to the audience the process for essentially sanctioning, commissioning, whatever the terminology is, a new degree.
Sure. So, when we look at degrees, especially at regional universities like Delta State, we have to think about the viability, how many students will study this, and of course, the student tuition pays the faculty and buys the equipment. So we have to be pretty cautious about taking on expenses. But when we have a new degree, we have to think about the audience and the market, and we do research, and we work with the IHL, look at labor statistics, particularly in Mississippi. What's the workforce development impact? And also, what's the student interest? I mean, if we look at a program, we say we'd love to have that program, and we see that there's, 9 of such programs in the state of Mississippi, we might say, you know what, that market's pretty saturated. So in some ways, like a business, we have to think about, is there room in the market for our particular product? And so in this case, we had programs that we knew had some viability, but not enough to survive on their own. So we kind of put things together like humanities and social science. We now have a bachelor's degree that's a combination of humanities and social science because we had a handful of history majors and a handful of English majors, and we didn't have enough to really make those majors go on their own. Because on our side, there's a bunch of overhead. There's personnel. There's payroll. So we've got to make sure we've got enough students to support the faculty, and then we have enough money for equipment. And also, we want enough students to have a cohort so they can learn from each other. We take these degrees through our internal process. Faculty vote. They really design it. I can put some general guidelines out there, but the real work of curriculum development is at the faculty level. Take it through our own internal process, take it through the provost approval, up to the IHL for a vote. And we have a last step through our accreditor, but we've got that under control as well, so we're excited.
Okay. And much like a business, the process you just described there, you got a fixed cost component, and you probably got a variable cost component as well. You got to, at a minimum, to make it economically viable and make sure that you can cover the fixed cost component.
Exactly. So another new degree we just got approved is in digital media. So in that case, we were looking at what did we already have essentially sunk costs in? What did we already invest in?
Right.
Well, we have a nice digital media studio. We have faculty with expertise. And we knew that there are emerging marketplace opportunities in digital media, and that's a workforce development area that Mississippi needs help in.
Yeah.
All those things come together to say this is a degree that we should invest in. And like anything else, there's a risk there. We can do all the research we want. We can certainly promote it, and then we have to have the final step, which is students vote with their feet when it comes to curriculum.
Yeah. And you said something, I guess, that a lot of folks probably don't think about, but you obviously have to when you're thinking about offering new degrees, is you got to see what the market looks like in terms of the other schools in the state. Are they offering similar programs? Because you're competing with them to a great extent.
Absolutely. And the IHL, of course, asks us to look at that, and part of our application for approval at the IHL level is what other institutions in the state have this degree.
Yeah.
And, we have to be sensitive to that because, of course, almost every college needs teacher education because Mississippi needs teachers.
Right.
Many colleges have nursing, and every single nurse can find a job in Mississippi.
Yeah.
So when we look at degrees, it's the duplication is not just does another school have it, but how many other schools have it, how successful are those programs, and is there space in the market for us to attract students to our program?
Sure. So will you possibly invest in some market research for that in that endeavor, or do you have available information for that?
Yeah, we have a lot of available information. I mean, we certainly subscribe to databases that higher ed across the country uses, and then we have the state level information that we get out of Jackson through various sources. So we don't really need to do more than that and look at the landscape in our region. But we, of course, then have to invest in the market promotion side. And that's a different step. Telling people
to sell it.
Yeah, you can have a new degree and no one knows about it. Well, that's not the same as having a new degree and getting out there and telling folks this is something we have. We hope you'll come study here with us.
Makes total sense. The landscape, Dr. Ennis, at higher ed, the environment itself, it like every other industry on the planet is subject to disruption. It's being disrupted. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that kind of stress you out a little bit as far as that goes?
Well, I mean, I'm in a people business. And with population what it is, there's less people, there's less 18-year-olds. So I think a lot about how America built an extraordinary, enviable higher education infrastructure throughout the 20th century. And it's the envy of the world. People from all over the world want to study in American colleges for good reason. But we built enough colleges to handle that peak of population that's now passed. Yeah. So now there is a contraction in the industry. And I tell folks that every single month last year, every month in 2023, 2024, the academic year, a college closed in America every month. And our job at Delta State is to be on the other side of that line, which is as the industry contracts, it will release students into the market.
Yeah, good point.
And our job is to be flexible and aggressive, like a fighting ogre, so that we can actually come out on the other side. And then once the market stabilizes, and that market stabilization will cost people a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and people like me will sit up all night thinking about it. But stronger, durable, flexible, and aggressive institutions, like any other contraction in the market, the ones standing after the worst of the contraction will be better for it.
Yeah.
There's a human cost to that, and I don't discount that, but that's the way we have to think about higher ed now. We're chasing fewer students, and so we have to give them the best experience we can.
Yeah, I think that's right. Even in business, when you go through that sort of same evolution and just progression, if you can stand and end up on the other side, you're usually better and stronger for it.
And I wouldn't bet against Delta State.
Yeah.
We have the right size and sort of ethos, if you will, culture to be flexible. And one of the wonderful things about this place, and the wonderful thing about the Delta, is that we have the resourcefulness and the energy, and we know what we're up against. And so sometimes smaller schools are more nimble in that, just like smaller businesses and smaller concerns can sometimes adjust to market realities more quickly than huge firms. So, we're not IBM. We're a startup. Yeah. We might be 100 years old, but in many ways we think like a startup when it comes to how to be in the market.
Even large organizations, they're constantly trying to figure out how do we be more agile in our operations, because it's critical because you get disrupted so fast.
Yeah, and when you're in a business that services people change, especially if there's a large number of young people in your market, as in higher ed. What they want, how they learn, what they care about, what attracts them is different every 3 to 5 years. It's not like I can change by generation. I have to see what does this year's 18-year-old care about, and frankly, what does next year's 16-year-old care about. So it keeps you going, but it's rewarding and wonderful. What we do at the other end is just so positive that it's worth the fight.
Enrollment nationwide overall is down, though.
Yes, sir.
Higher ed, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And some of that, there are numerous factors. Some of that, of course, is, as you said, we kind of have a shrinking population. In fact, I saw a report the other day, we're rapidly approaching a point where we're going to have more in our country over the age of, I think, 65 than under 18.
Yeah, and that's an issue for the demographers. The replacement is a real problem in America. But so get out there and have a good time.
Elon Musk says hit the thing that keeps him up at night more than anything. I've seen him in an interview say it's running out of people to do work. I don't know if you've seen him talk about that.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
But the good news is that we have people in Mississippi who still want and need a college degree, and we're going to go get them.
Yeah, well, that's the deal. If you can hang around, we'll continue our discussion.
I'd love to have that.
We've got Dr. Dan Ennis, president of Delta State University, right here in Cleveland, Mississippi. That's where we are for the 50 Nights of Lights. Stay with us, coming right back. So we're visiting with Dr. Dan Ennis, the president of Delta State University. So we were talking in the last segment, Dr. Ennis, about how you guys in higher ed, it is a business. You're well aware of that. It's an industry. You've got to constantly react to changing, lots of changing dynamics that you've got to factor in to your management. But one question I wanted to ask you, and I've asked this of many folks in higher ed at the high level, administrative management level, the traditional linear degree. Seems like that employers are less concerned about that than they are perhaps certifications or more targeted, specific, tailored training that produces some sort of attestation that they've achieved it, whether we call it a degree or not. But people that complete that sort of curriculum, they're in pretty good shape to find employment. And that's what getting a degree is all about, going to college is all about.
Well, certainly I think what we see is that as industry looks for people, and there being fewer people, that there are some industries, particularly technical industries, where they want the certification, they want the skill set.
Yeah.
And higher ed wasn't very well equipped to do that probably a generation ago or even 10 years ago. But, I can't tell you how many meetings I've gone to where we've talked about the concept of stackable credentials.
Okay.
Where, you complete a series of shorter-term certificates, 12 hours in our higher ed parlance, and then eventually you've got enough and you put them all together and then you have a degree.
Okay.
I think that's probably a future for some industries because you'll have people cycling in and out of education based on their workforce needs. And that's very different from the old model where you go to college for 4 years and you live in a dorm and you date and you go to football games and then you come out at 22 or 23, sort of formed for the market. I think now we're going to see, and higher ed has to adjust to the fact that there'll be people that come into the higher ed for, 12 weeks and then go work for a few years, or they'll be concurrent with higher ed.
Okay.
We've always had continuing ed, but I think continuing ed is going to be a bigger part of how we operate in this space.
Yeah, well, that makes total sense. And the other thing that I think we're witnessing that's so necessary, and honestly, I feel like higher ed's been a little late to this, is there's more collaboration with the private sector. You guys are talking more to the private sector about what exactly do you need here, instead of us sort of creating these curricula in a vacuum often, as we did, and just hoping and thinking, well, that's the proper course of study. But you're working a lot more with the private sector these days, aren't you?
Absolutely. I think as the conditions have changed in higher ed, there's not been much luxury. Just roll the dice on a degree without a thought for what happens next.
Okay.
And I don't think that higher ed did that arbitrarily or just trivially, but there was a time when it was just the degree itself was the credential, and what you studied was less important than sort of your formation as an adult. But, of course, in the market we're in now, we need to show students, and we owe it to students to say, here's an outcome that's going to make your life better. And so that means knowing this degree is going to service this industry, and this industry has this many jobs in Mississippi, and we want to be part of that conversation. We're
just seeing a lot. I'm seeing a lot more, again, collaboration, and I think employers appreciate that. And they're seeking employees that can hit the ground running a little quicker so that they don't have to invest a whole lot of money in ramping them up to be productive.
Yeah, and I think collaboration is a key word because there's also part of our higher education mission, which is to prepare the students for their last job, not their first job. So that means we also want to say these technical skills are important right now. But in 10 years, this particular piece of equipment is going to be out of date.
Yeah.
So there has to be a mix of very specific targeted training, if you will, but there's also got to be ways of thinking, ways of problem solving, and that steps back out of the technical into the more, liberal arts and social science and humanities, where you actually think about how do you make decisions, how do you analyze a problem. So the collaboration also comes from higher ed, saying we know from thousands of years of teaching that there's some internal value to thinking this way, and we want that in the degree as well.
Makes total sense. Before we go, you feel good about your future? I know you came in under very trying circumstances, had to make some difficult decisions. You feel optimistic?
I'm delighted, and I am so excited about Delta State. It's a great place, and I'm glad to be here, and we've got a lot of good things happening here.
That's fantastic. Love to hear that. Dr. Ennis, thanks for joining us. Dr. Dan Ennis, president of Delta State University, has been our guest. Thank you, sir.
It's been my pleasure.
Appreciate
Always
it.
good to see you.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Folks, we're stepping aside for a break. We're at 50 Nights of Lights as the great Steve Perry bumps us out of this segment, and top of the hour, Fox News, SuperTalk News is next. We got an hour left.